before we start today's session with people from all the world. Now let's keep silent for a few minutes. To really settle down mentally. So in the next 3 or 5 minutes, let's stay silent. One can feel the body sensation, the breath, listen to the sound around. Putting aside everything else, or simply putting aside everything human beings have invented. Simply be with this moment, letting go of all the resistance. Observe all the tendencies to strive, making efforts. And this is what is, and seeing what is as it is. Let's do it now. Now, shall we start today's session? The human mind is very complicated. Full of various mental processes, thoughts, ideas, preferences, biases. The mind is so conditioned. And in that conditioning, the mind is divided. Different minds are conditioned to different things. Therefore, they have different views, projections, feelings, and so on. And it is rather easy for one to stick to one's own feelings, opinions. When everybody is doing the same, the division between human beings become worse and worse. And this human world is so divided from the west to the east, across the globe. It is not a phenomenon in the local areas, but these great divisions between humanities is taking place across the world. One may wonder, what happens to the mind? What has happened to human consciousness? Why has human consciousness become like this? There are so many issues in different forms. One of the issues that can be very visible is loneliness. Some people may feel lonely. And that feeling becomes very strong and dominant. Some people haven't felt it, but the mind is already in the mood of loneliness. So today, if it's possible, we can start from the topic of loneliness. And from that, perhaps we can go deeper. And maybe we can come upon the fundamental issues of all humanities that not only bring about loneliness, but also various issues and the challenges of all humanities. Some people, as we said today earlier, can feel the sense of loneliness strongly. But loneliness are not limited to those people who can feel it directly, but also apply to almost everybody who are escaping and seeking pleasure to avoid boredom and the various issues. When the mind is seeking pleasure or escaping in various forms, the mind may not feel lonely temporarily, but that existence is still the expression of loneliness. So we can't ask one whether you feel lonely or not. That asking itself is very limited. But rather, can we understand the essence of loneliness? Not through asking people their feelings. Feelings can be very self-deceptive. When one goes into oneself, inquire into oneself, go deep to find out what it means to be lonely. And in that deep investigation of oneself, one perhaps can find out the real meaning of loneliness. And the very understanding of it may bring about the ultimate solution to loneliness. Obviously, now there are various social activities to be organized in the name of helping people to alleviate loneliness. And the demand for social activities has been very strong because this great oscillation of the mind needs to connect people via various so-called social activities. That is what is going on across the world. However, the issue of loneliness has never been resolved because we haven't gone into the bottom of it. We haven't really devoted our energy to find out the root of loneliness. We are all human beings. But why does one feel lonely? Or one's living express loneliness? Why we are human beings which are connected each other, which is a fact, now cannot be felt as a fact. Why do we feel disconnected from each other? That disconnection is completely related to loneliness. Why has life become isolated and unrelated to nothing? Come and observe this even yourself now. We don't need to depend on any theories or ideas, but rather can one perceive now, perceive what is going on the mind. Why do people feel disconnected from each other? Is that because each one sticks to one's own opinions, feelings, ideas? And that state of sticking to something bring about self-importance. When I hold on to my opinion and you are doing the same, both of us have self-importance at the root. Is that so? Please observe this in yourself. When the mind is holding on to something, an idea, opinion, or anything else, the sense of self-importance immediately appears. And when the mind is holding on to various things, the accumulation of self-importance becomes very, very significant. Creating the illusion of the center, which is the me, the self. And then all of the thought processes are built upon this center, making the center more and more significant and dominant. Is that the leading factor that make people feel disconnected? That is the self-centered living and the self-centered thinking, which is the same, has divided people. When the mind is in that self-centered state, there is disconnection. And in that disconnection, the self-importance is built more and more. When one is looking at this world as it is so right. there's no connection between each other, and everyone is going further into the self. Self become more and more dominant. So that almost everybody becomes an isolated island. Please see the phenomenon of the mind of human beings across the world. That pattern is being repeated time and time again, perpetuating. The human division and disconnection. When the self and its importance is dominating, I can't understand other people. Because my own feeling, my own thoughts and ideas are so dominating. Then I say everything through my own experience, views, ideas. Therefore, I cannot see the actual station. Therefore, I can't understand anybody else. Though I think I understand myself, but actually I don't. Because the me, the ego, is also preventing myself from seeing myself as it is. So I have a lot of vanities, illusions, various pleasurable ideas. And I keep seeking fulfillment, satisfaction, pleasure. To intoxicate myself, to escape from the actual situation, the truth. And I take great pleasure in various things. In order to escape from the feeling of isolation and loneliness. But the pleasure and the fear also go hand in hand. I have a great fear in losing the pleasure, in not obtaining the pleasure, because I don't want to face the fact of living. So the mind is on my hand taking pleasure, but on the other hand, it's full of fear. In that state, the mind does not feel lonely, but what one is going through in that state is the expression of loneliness. The mind can also feel very bored. Therefore, craving stimulation, very strong stimulation, other sexual stimulation, or any other pleasurable sensory stimulation, or intellectual stimulation. So various social gatherings and events are organized and offered. To cater to the need of fulfillment and stimulation. Still, it is the expression of the loneliness in different forms. So can the mind perceive this great isolation as it is? Perceive the mischief made by the self-centered state. Can one perceive the danger of this isolated existence? And that isolation is created out of the thoughts. Our life has been surrounded by excessive thoughts. Thoughts have their places in our living. It has a lot of technological knowledge human beings can use to do various things. But thoughts can also bring about self-importance, the sense of me. The ego. So when thoughts are functioning as technological knowledge, thoughts stay in the right place. But when thoughts are functioning as the me, the ego, creating the self-centered state, it must breed disorder. When the thoughts invents the me, this self-centered state, there must be division, because each center is divided with another center. Therefore, there's disconnection. Where there's Where there is disconnection, there must be conflict, contradictions. So therefore, thoughts breed disorder. This self-centered living is the manifestation of thoughts as disorder. Can one observe this as it is? Observing overdose as it is demands one's humility, deeper level of honesty. Otherwise, the ego, which is the product of thoughts, is very cunning. It is always resistant to seeing the truth, the actual. Can one listen to this statement without being caught up in verse? That's to say, one must observe one's tendency to judge, to form opinions, to agree or disagree. Obviously, we are not arguing for anything. This is not an occasion for agreeing or disagreeing, but rather, can one observe directly without being filtered by one's own opinions, accumulated knowledge, thoughts? Because all those translations and interpretations only distort what one observes. Without any distortion, as human beings, we observe the same. But it is up to everybody to deal with the distortion, which demands humility and diligence. The mind must be sharp, clear, see the issues as clearly as they are, without any distortion from the thought processes. That is, it demands one's direct perception. Then, thinking, thoughts will stay in the right place. But without direct perception, thoughts as accumulated knowledge, experience, only distorts what one observes. Therefore, bringing about disconnection. Because that distortion itself is the expression of opinions, viewpoints, ideas, which has nothing to do with the actualities. So that's why this inquiry demands all of us attention, full attention, dealing with the various cunningness of the mind, the resistance of the ego, and also distortions from various accumulated knowledge and experience. Simply perceiving with a fresh mind. As we said, the me, the self, is the product of thoughts. The concept of ownership, the concept of possessiveness is the activity of thoughts to possess something. And it brings about the feeling of possessiveness, behind which is the self-importance. And the whole society, especially in the Western world, is based on the concept of the self, the ego. The ego makes various choices, and society offers various options. We don't condemn this, but we must observe what happens to the mind. The whole society keeps emphasizing the concept of me, therefore perpetuating the self-importance in everybody. The me is empowered. The me is enhanced. But also the me is in isolation. Thoughts bring about the me. And human beings are also worshipping thoughts. Therefore, human beings are also worshipping themselves. which is again the pattern of the self-importance. Can one observe this as it is? Can one see the illusions of the me? Thoughts are a materialistic process. They are not something miracle. They are not something new. But when the mind is being dominated by thoughts, that kind of feeling of the me is so strong, it's so real. When the mind is living in the fragment created by the thoughts, which is also called being conditioned, that feeling, which is the distortion of the thoughts, is deemed as true. And everything is based on that. That is what is going on across the world. The life is totally based on illusions. And in that illusion of the me, the self, there is disconnection. There is loneliness. There is tremendous isolation in the living, which has lost its meaning. Loneliness itself shows that life in this way is totally meaningless. And the people haven't seen it, obviously. Otherwise, the commercialism and consumerism wouldn't have been so highly developed. In that isolated and meaningless living, pleasure becomes tremendously important. To let the mind forget that isolation for a while, though nothing has been solved. This materialistic gain, money, products, can bring about various pleasures. The possession of a beautiful house, the possession of a wonderful furniture, or the pleasure of being highly respected, or the pleasure of having power. And all those things are born out of isolation and also contributing to the isolation and perpetuating it. Can one observe this vicious pattern, vicious circle? In isolation, the mind seeks pleasure. And in pleasure, the mind also has fear. But it will seek more into pleasure. Therefore, this isolation, which is the essence of the loneliness, is enhanced and perpetuated. Can one see this as his? not through the words of the speaker, but rather can one observe others directly. So various thought processes bring about the sense of me, and the me is seeking more and more pleasure. And also accompanied by fear, tremendous fear. And that self-centered living is the manifestation of this isolation and loneliness. That's to say, the me, the ego, is loneliness. It looks like two different verbs, but actually they are the same thing. Can one see this? Human beings have enriched the vocabulary to such a great extent. Almost every phenomenon, everything can have one or multiple names. Can the mind not be trapped in any verbal construct? That's to say, can one go beyond the words to see the thing? The ego, loneliness, seem to be two different verbs. But when the mind sees the actual, it finds that the two words are pointing to the same thing. Though each word has different explanations in the dictionary, but they point to the same thing. Language is our tool here to communicate. We need to use words, language to point to something. But at the same time, the language is also a barrier to our communication. Because the mind can be easily trapped in the verse, in the verbal statement, in the concept. So it demands one's great care to use language in the right way, properly, at the same time without being trapped in the language. And unfortunately, the mind is so easy to be trapped in language. And this demands one's much greater, much deeper observation. To observe, actually, and exactly the relationship between the language and this body. So one can use language, not is being used by language. It's not difficult to see. I hope you are also seeing that. The whole world is being used by language. The mind merely depends on verse for explanation. But the mind does not see the actual for oneself. So the mind is conditioned to verse. Therefore, the mind becomes very lazy. And there is also another contributing factor of the human isolation. And when the mind merely depends on verse, the mind must be divided. Right? Words have multiple meanings, have different implications. And when the mind merely depends on verse, human beings are divided by languages, by verse. You see, people are arguing, debating, quarreling. That's merely the expression of the conflict from the verbal things, because the mind merely depends on verse for a sense of certainty. So the wrong usage of language is also the contributing factor of the human isolation and the loneliness. Is that it? And the mere dependence on language, on the verbal expressions, is still the activities of the me, the self, the ego, isn't it? The ego is something verbal. Can we observe this as we are talking along this topic? Unless the mind is free of all oscillations, perhaps loneliness is abiding. being isolated, the mind wants various social activities, but still the mind is taking pleasure from it. Therefore, nothing is solved. And in some societies, people are so utterly individualistic. Even social gathering becomes difficult. But all of those are superficial. Can one see the superficial and go beyond it, perceiving the essence of the loneliness? The ego, the self, the me, is the essence of the loneliness. It's when willing to deal with the essence. Dealing with the essence demands one's very serious attitude. It is not something playful or flippant. It demands one's earnest attitude, eager to find out, see the real cause of all the mess, including this utter loneliness. That's to say, can the mind be free of all conditionings? Can the mind be free of all fragments created by thoughts? Can the mind be free of all traps done by thoughts? Can the mind be free of all influences, not only the external influences, the media, the propaganda, tradition, culture, and all those things, but also the inward influences from the language, from the verse? Can one simply put aside all those so the mind can become quiet, silent, sensitive, and alive? Otherwise, the mind is very dull, losing the sensitivity to everything. And that loneliness implies this dullness and insensitivity. lack of sensitivity. When the mind is free of all that, what is that? The mind is alone. You know, the word alone comes from two words, all one. When the mind is free of any fragment, any divisions, the mind is one. There's no oscillation when there's no division or fragments. So all one means free of any oscillation. That's to say, can the mind be alone? When the mind is alone, the mind is connected with everything because it is free of any fragment. Therefore, there's no space for the ego, the self. The mind is sensitive, harmonious, alive, and also silent. So aloneness has nothing to do with loneliness. And aloneness means freedom from oscillation, therefore loneliness. And when the mind is alone, it cannot be lonely. Of course, that state is beyond any verse, and the speaker cannot describe it, because any verse that describes it only destroys it. It's up to one to compound it, to find out what it means to be alone. When the mind is really alone, the mind observes everything it is. The sensitivity of the neuron system will lead one to very deep observation. And the mind will compound insight. The insight will bring about real actions. And the real actions, which is never a product of thoughts, embodies the living, which is never isolated. Embodies a living that is really connected. Without me, the ego, the observation has no boundaries. And that observation is no longer the self-centered activities, but represents the authentic human beings. Because that observation is no longer something personal. It is something universal. It represents humanity. I think that's enough for the first part of today's session. So next, shall we keep silent for 5 minutes? Then let's come back. If someone has some questions or topics, we can look at it together. People can leave a message on Inside Timer, so we can respond that together. Shall we? Let's keep silent for 5 minutes, then come back. Shall we start the second part?
All right. A friend is asking, I just keep listening to talks like this, hoping my mind will see the truth of it and just cooperate, free itself. What do you think of this?
Can one listen to this talk without regarding this talk as an authority? Can one not depend on any talks, including these talks, though one can listen to it, give a full attention to what is being heard? That's not an issue at all. But can one not depend on any talks? Can one master the art of observing? That's to say, can the mind observe without being trapped by any mental construct, verbal statement? Seeing the actual, seeing what is really going on the mind, is not a verbal process. Seeing means directly perceiving. So the mind gets insight. The insight changes the mind. The insight is not something one can seek, but rather when the mind is really observing without any deception, with clarity, then the mind can compound insight. When one is listening to these talks, there could be some effects, temporarily, but please don't be deceived by those effects. The speaker here is also using verse to point to something. But can one see the thing, not through the verse? Therefore, can the mind be free of any dependence, including this dependence on this verse or talks? That's to say, can the mind put aside all the verse languages, simply perceive, feel, find out? And when one is listening to this talk, can one perceive the differences of the languages used in these talks from the daily usage language? When one is at all serious and sensitive, it's not difficult to see that the way of using language here is different from the daily usage. isn't it? Because the daily usage language is full of self-centered opinions, divisions. The mind is trapped in various subtle reactions to those words, because those words are hurting or dividing, therefore perpetuating the me, the ego. And when the speaker is giving a talk now here, the usage of the language isn't free of the ego. Can one perceive this directly? And can one observe one's language usage pattern? Can one's language usage free of any self-centered thinking? So, madam, it's not difficult to say this. When the mind is self-centered, and what it expresses is still self-centered. Therefore, those words, its expressions, will influence the mind in reverse. So, the problematic thinking bring about the problematic verbal expressions, and those problematic verbal expressions come back to influence the mind in a problematic way. Can one see this pattern or vicious loop? Can the mind be free of all these patterns? That's to say, free of the egocentric thinking and free of the egocentric expressions. So, what one thinks and what one can express stay one. If one is really willing to listen to these talks, can one capture this essence and apply it to one's life? What matters is to have insight. And that insight will change the mind immediately. And that insight is free of time. You can never seek it, but rather when one is really observing, the insight can come unknowingly. Shall we look at another question, Joyce?
Sure. The next question is wanting to be desireless also a desire?
Of course. The questioner has answered the question for himself or herself. Wanting to be desireless is still a form of desire. So the question is that can one be free of desire? But wanting to be free from desires is still desire. And what is one to do? Right? How can one deal with this dilemma? Or contradiction? Wanting to be free from desire is still the thought processes to seek to achieve something. And the desire is also a thought process to achieve, to become, to get something. So one must understand the essence of desire, or understand what is desire. The actual understanding of what is desire free the mind from any desires. Therefore, the biological desire stay in the right place. The mind is free of any psychological desires that is disconnected from the biological situations. To understand what is desire, we must not contaminate. Observing desire is not to contaminate. That's to say, observe what his mind is going through in that process, which is called desire. So what is desire? When I go to a restaurant, which offers splendid food, and when I taste it, wow, the taste brought such strong sensations to the body, to the palate. The smell of the soup, the color of the recipes, the texture of the bread, and the sweetness just in the right level. So all those bring wonderful sensations to the body, to the palate. That's something normal, because our whole neural system is always interacting with everything around us. So when is really eating that way, the mind experiences it without knowing it is experiencing. But then thoughts come along saying, wow, the food is great. I want to eat more. I want to come back to this restaurant again next time to reproduce it, to reproduce that feelings. That's where desire arises, isn't it? So the desire is a thought process superimposed on the body sensations. And for many people, this process can come very quickly because there's no awareness, there's no observation. So the thoughts can pop up immediately to be superimposed on the sensation of the neuron system. But can the mind observe all those carefully, deeply? Then the mind is able to observe there's a gap between the sensations of the neural system and the thought activities. And when the mind is really observing, the mind is free of desires. When the mind is observing, the mind is free of desires. Not about wanting to get rid of desires. Wanting is still a thought process. But when the mind is observing all of its thought process without any choice, the mind is free of desires. there's a sensation which is healthy, normal. And when the mind is observing the thoughts, and thoughts won't make mischiefs, only when the mind is not aware. So the thoughts pop up so easily, and desire immediately control the whole body. So can one observe all the activity of thoughts, and that observation, which is choiceless, therefore objective, free the mind from any desires, and only the necessary ones, which are connected to the biological situation, stay in the right place. And please check it. Please verify it for yourself. Shall we go to the next question?
Okay. The next question is, how do I observe directly without filters? How do I observe directly without filters?
We must be very cautious about this word how, because how implies a direction. How implies seeking a method. So first of all, we must realize the impact of the word on us. Please don't ask how. Please be aware of the implications of asking how. To be free from all filters so the mind can observe directly. It means that the mind must be aware of all the filters. Asking how, as we said, is a mental process, is a thought process, similar to the question previous. Wanting to be free from desire, wanting to ask how, well, in essence, is a sin. So putting aside asking how, can the mind be aware of all the filters? That awareness, which is never a choice, dissolves the filters. That's to say, when I'm listening to the talk here, and when the mind is observing everything, observing what is really going on, it simply be aware of every biases, opinions, accumulated knowledge. And when the mind realizes that, oh, it's my past experiences which is not reliable. Oh, it's my opinions which is never verified. That awareness brings about the insight. Therefore, the mind stops filtering its observance, filtering its observance through the filters. Can one say this directly? That's to say, be aware of everything choicelessly when the mind is using thoughts. So when the mind is observing, be aware of all the biases, be aware of all the verbal expressions, opinions. And that awareness, as we said many times today, is never a choice. When the mind is using thoughts, can the awareness must be there. So when the mind is doing that, the mind is really observing. Because when it is observing, it observes all the things. And that is a full attention. Please don't misunderstand the word observe. Observe implies no efforts. It's not that I make efforts to observe all. Then it is still the ego behind the thought processes. But rather, can the mind make no efforts simply be quiet. When the mind has no efforts, everything is revealing themselves. So the biases, opinions, various judgment running in the background can come foreground. And in that state, which is free of any efforts, which is in full attention, the mind is seeing the actual without being filtered by thoughts. Because thoughts as biases, as filters, as the past accumulated knowledge are also being aware in that state without any effort. Shall we go to the next question?
Sure. The next question is, it seems to be that observation comes from acknowledging the input that your senses are capable of registering. Therefore, you don't have to know how. Your body already knows how. You just need to let it do what it does.
Yes, you can put it in that way. Don't let the ego prevent this from happening. Just give full attention. Just fully be with this moment. The whole neural system has its own intelligence, which is different from the thought process. Thoughts are only part of that intelligence. Now, thoughts are dominating. The ego is dominating. Therefore, when the partial is dominating the whole, the intelligence is suppressed. When the mind can let go of the partial, come back to the total, the neural system is working in its own rhythm. I don't need to ask how consciously, because that's still a thought process. The whole neural system has its own intelligence. And I need to trust. And the barrier of the trust is the thought process. The mind always wants to cling to thoughts, therefore not trusting the body, the whole neural system. But to observe is to trust, to make no efforts, to stay unknown. Can one do it to verify it? This is not the speaker's or anyone's theories. It is pointing something factual. But can one compound that factual? Shall we move to the next question?
Yeah. No more new questions for now. So if you have some new questions, you can leave a message on inside the timer.
So can the mind stay unknown?
A new question comes.
Okay.
It is, would you say that the practice of meditation and mindfulness are key to learning how to let go? Would you say that The practice of meditation and mindfulness are key to learning how to let go.
So before we can answer this question, we must examine it first. Because when the questioner mentions the word meditation, it seems that we have a common meaning of that. And based on that, the questioner reads these questions. So we have the expression practice of meditation and the mindfulness. But to the speaker, what is more important is to understand what is meditation. And when the mind understands what is meditation, the mind knows how to meditate. He won't ask anybody how to do that. So, first of all, the speaker will ask, is meditation divorced from life? Do we tend to regard meditation as something practice, which is a small part of the life, but it's not the whole life? Or the real meditation itself is life. To live a life without any hypocrisy. To live a life that is deeply rooted in truth, goodness, care, and compassion. And to live a life free of the hindrance from the ego. And that living itself is meditation. Can one live that way? When one is lived that way, that's to say, one devote all the energy to live that way. Then where is the space for practice? Living is practice. Otherwise, practice has no meaning. Is it? And when the mind is living that way, which is the real meditation, the mind is free of any attachment. But when the mind is attached and regarding meditation as some practice, which is a small corner, and the mind wants to let it go, but what is behind it is still the egocentric thinking, right? Wanting to practice something, to achieve something. Behind it is still the desire and achievement and all that. So can one say the fact that meditation, in the real sense, and all those ones has been polluted in the market? The real meditation is living. It is never divorced from life.
The friend is asking a following question. If meditation means observing the mind, then isn't it necessary for progress? If meditation means observing the mind, then isn't it necessary for progress?
So we must be careful about the word progress. Why do we care about progress? Isn't it because the mind is measuring, in a measuring state, want to become better or achieve something more? Isn't it the measuring mind an ambitious mind. When the mind is really observing, as we said today in the session, which is never a choice, but giving full attention without any effort, trust the neuron system intelligence, the mind will change, will go through mutations. Why should I care about progress? Now, who is caring about progress? What is that entity that cares about progress? Is that still the ego who is in a comparing state, measuring state? And can the mind stop measuring? Technologically, we measure, right, to be exact, precise. And then various knowledge is born from measurement. But why does the measurement, this measuring habit, overflow into the psyche? The mind psychologically measuring, comparing, and from which it can take pleasure in very small achievement. Can the mind observe all those? And also, the progress itself implies time, right? Okay, through time, I can become better. But the change the mind is free of time. The mutation of the human consciousness is free of time. Therefore, it is irrelevant to progress. So can the mind observe completely? That's to say, can the mind stay unknown? Therefore, progress is irrelevant. But the mind will go through this genuine transformation. Shall we go to the next question?
Sure. The friend is asking, sounds like letting go of everything all at once versus letting go of more and more over time. Sounds like letting go of everything all at once versus letting go of more and more over time.
That's the point. Can the mind do that? Either letting go everything in one go mentally, psychologically, or then letting go is not possible, right? We think that we can let go one by one, little by little, but at the same time, the mind keeps accumulating in different ways. And this process of letting go one by one is a time process. It's time bonding. It's time binding. And in time bonding, there are various mischiefs and deceptions. And at the same time, the mind let go of something. At the same time, also the mind is accumulating more attachment. And then in that time binding process, there's progress, there's measurement. But all those are thought processes, full of deceptions. So can the mind put aside everything now? Can one do that as we are talking along this topic? One can have a car, one can have a house, it doesn't matter. But can the mind psychologically let go of everything? And when it's doing that, it is free of time. It's not a time-bounding process. Therefore, has nothing to do with progress. But can that happen? Which demands complete observation, clarity. And that action is born of insight. And that action brings about a truthful living. Shall we look at the next question or and other people's?
No more new questions for now.
Okay.
Yeah. So today's session has lasted for 1 hour and 54 minutes. If anyone has any more questions, one can leave a message on Inside Timer. If there is no more questions, today's session is going to be wrapped up.
Yeah. So can the mind put aside everything now? Please don't delay it. When this is delayed, various deceptions and mischiefs will come in between. Can the mind have this sheer action, putting aside everything else human beings have created, putting aside all the concepts, ideas, everything the society has imposed on me? Can I put aside all those? Can I come back to nothing? Not being afraid of nothing, just be nothing. And in that nothingness, there is positivity. Not I seek positivity from various pleasurable ideas, which is absurd and childish. But rather, can one be nothing? And in that nothingness, the mind will compound what is positive. As we are talking, I think this session is coming to a halt, coming to a close. Today, in the past 2 hours, we have examined various topics, starting from loneliness to isolation, to the thought, ego, and also to the essence of observation, letting go, time, progress, achievement, desire, and so on. All those things are connected. And it's up to one to capture the essence of it. And if you want, please donate any amount to support this purity. Which is, of course, very vulnerable in a society that is based on the ego. The speaker is also doing everything he can to live authentically, truthfully. So any amount of donation, if you can contribute, will help this charity and initiative. I think that's enough for today's session. Joyce, anything more to add from you?
No more to add.
So now the speaker will keep silent for a few minutes before the session goes offline. Take care. See you in the future sessions.